Have you ever sat in a room so quiet that your own heartbeat startled you? Have you ever stared into the mirror and felt a stranger looking back? Not because you didn't recognize your face, but because you finally saw the part of you that had been waiting for silence. Imagine this, a woman surrounded by noise, not the noise of traffic or television, but the noise of expectations, of roles of desire, knocking like a relentless drumbeat. And then, one day it stops, not by accident, not by force, but because the soul, weary from being ignored, finally demands stillness. When the body goes silent, most people panic. They mistake the quiet for emptiness. They believe something has died, but Carl Jung would say no, something is being born. You see, abstinence is not about deprivation. It is not the absence of touch. It is the return to touch, the deepest kind, the one that starts from within. This is not celibacy for rules. This is a sacred rebellion. A conscious choice to no longer offer your skin to those who never sought your soul. And when the body retreats from the noise of desire, the soul awakens slowly, sometimes painfully, but with purpose. Jung believed that everything we repress finds its way back through symbols, through shadows, through the quiet spaces we avoid. And so when a woman steps away from the dance of being desired, not because she is broken, but because she is listening, something ancient stirs inside her. This is the moment of threshold. The body, now undistracted, becomes a vessel. The craving for validation fades, and in its place emerges a craving for truth. Not the truth handed down by society, but the one buried beneath layers of persona, the masks she wore to be loved, to be wanted to belong. Jung called it individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are beneath the masks. But that journey always begins in the silence, in the ache, in the terrifying stillness where nothing outside can distract you from what's rising within. And what rises is not always gentle. The shadow shows itself. The woman meets the part of her that settled, that compromised, that feared abandonment more than she feared self-betrayal. And in that encounter, something extraordinary happens. She begins to choose, not react, not perform, choose. She chooses solitude over performance, silence over seduction, depth over attention. And the world does not know what to do with a woman like that. Because a woman who no longer seeks to be desired becomes unpredictable. Not because she is dangerous, but because she is finally free. Jung warned that when we step away from our projections, from the fantasies we place upon others, we are left staring at the raw material of our own soul. It's disorienting, like walking through a familiar house and realizing you've never actually opened certain doors. Behind them live the forgotten voices, the repressed instincts, the dreams deferred not by fate but by fear. And now, with the absence of touch of lovers, of the endless cycle of being chosen or rejected, she begins to hear those voices. At first, they come as restlessness, as longing with no name, as the unbearable weight of a night that stretches on forever. But this is not punishment. This is initiation. Because what if abstinence is not what she's giving up, but what she's returning to? What if it's not about what she's missing, but about what she's finally able to meet her own soul, her own wildness, her own rhythm? And in this sacred, quiet time stretches, not like boredom, but like spaciousness. Days no longer revolve around who might text, who might call. who might see her as desirable. Instead, her energy circles inward. It spirals down into the roots, into memory, into the feminine unconscious that Jung spoke of, a realm of ancient symbols, archetypes, and buried truths passed down not through language, but through sensation. The dreams become more vivid. The body aches not from need, but from remembrance. And this remembrance is of a time before performance, before pleasing, before becoming an object in someone else's story. She remembers being the author, the origin, the myth herself. And then she understands the hunger she felt for love was never about the other. It was the hunger to return to herself, to be seen by her own gaze, to be touched by her own truth, to be embraced by the parts she was told were too much, too emotional, too intense, too untamable. Jung said that the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. But no one tells you that this becoming will first feel like dying, because the persona, the false self crafted for survival, will resist. It will scream. It will tempt, and the world will echo its voice. Friends will tell her to get back out there. Family will suggest she's being too picky. Social media will parade fantasies of couples of passion, of belonging. But she is not lonely. She is sacred. She is in vigil. Her body is not on pause. It is in preparation, not waiting for a man, but waiting for herself, the real self, the soul that has waited a lifetime to be heard. And once she begins to hear that voice, that quiet, unwavering whisper from within, nothing external can ever speak louder. It's not that she no longer wants to be touched, to be held, to be known. It's that now those desires are rooted in sovereignty, not scarcity. She no longer begs the world to reflect her worth. She embodies it. Jung would say this is the soul reclaiming its throne. The ego dethroned watches in panic as the old games lose their thrill. The endless cycle of being pursued and discarded, desired and forgotten, no longer entertains her. She sees it now for what it always was, a performance to mask the deeper fear of being unseen by herself. The paradox is sharp. The more she withdraws from outer validation, the more magnetic she becomes. But this magnetism is different. It's not a lure. It's a frequency. A vibration that says, I do not chase. I attract only that which can meet me where I truly am. And very few can. Because she no longer plays half-truths. She no longer shrinks to fit. She no longer dilutes her fire to comfort those who fear being burned. Abstinence then becomes a sacred fire. Not the absence of heat, but the refinement of it. The body quiets so the soul can roar. And when the soul roars, it does not shout. It simply exists so powerfully that silence becomes its symphony. Jung knew that every woman, if she walks far enough into her own depths, will eventually meet the shadow. And that shadow is not the enemy, it is the gateway. It is the version of herself she hid to be loved, the truth she buried to be accepted. And now in this space of no external distraction, it rises. Not to haunt her, but to invite her, to integrate, to reconcile, to become whole. The woman who once feared being alone now honors it, because she knows what appears as emptiness is actually a womb, a sacred space where the next version of herself is gestating. And no, it is not always beautiful. There are nights that feel endless, doubts that claw at her resolve, memories that sting without warning. But these are not signs of failure. They are signs of life, of evolution, of becoming. She is no longer seduced by the surface. She wants the marrow, the real, the honest. And because of this, many will leave. Some will call her cold. Others will call her crazy. But Jung would say they are only reacting to what they don't understand: a woman who is no longer controlled by her longing, a woman who no longer fears her own depth, a woman who has become untouchable not because she cannot be touched, but because she cannot be manipulated. She has faced the abyss within and did not flinch, and now she holds power not over others, but over herself. And that power does not shout, does not boast. It radiates. It hums in how she walks into a room and does not seek to be seen, and yet no one can ignore her. It echoes in the way she listens without trying to fix or impress, simply because she has made peace with her own silence. She is no longer waiting for a grand romance to rescue her from herself. She no longer needs her reflection in someone else's eyes to confirm her beauty or her worth. Jung taught that the self, the truest center of our being, is not found in others. It is discovered in the crucible of solitude, in the confrontation with the unconscious, in the burning away of illusions. And now this woman walks that path, not always gracefully, not always without tears, but always with intention. Each step she takes is no longer dictated by fear of being left behind, but by devotion to never again leaving herself. This is why the silence matters, because it strips away the noise of who she was told to be: the seductress, the nurturer, the muse, and returns her to the rawness of simply being. No more roles, no more masks, just presence, sacred, grounded, fierce presence. And the world trembles before her, not because she seeks power, but because she no longer needs permission. She is no longer the echo of another's desire. She is the origin. And origin, as Jung might say, is the most terrifying thing to a society built on conformity. In her stillness, she begins to see, not just with her eyes, but with her intuition, sharp as lightning, ancient as myth. She sees which relationships drained her, which patterns kept her small, which desires were never hers to begin with. And most importantly, she sees herself, the woman, beneath the performance, beneath the longing, beneath the ache, the one who was always there, waiting patiently to be chosen by herself. There's something holy in that moment, not religious, but sacred, a reclaiming of the altar within, where love is not barter, not strategy, but offering. She now understands that abstinence was never about punishment. It was a clearing, a consecration, a refusal to pour her nectar into empty vessels. The more she listens to her soul, the less she explains herself, the less she apologizes, the less she tolerates being half held, half seen, half met. Because she is no longer a fraction. She is full. And fullness changes everything. It doesn't beg. It doesn't prove. It simply is. And when fullness becomes her new baseline, her entire world begins to rearrange. The same invitations no longer allure her. The same cycles no longer seduce. Even the old ache for companionship, once sharp and consuming, now feels like a distant echo, something that once ruled her, but no longer governs her choices. She moves slower now, not out of hesitation, but because every step is sacred. Every yes is deliberate. Every no is unapologetic. Jung believed that the soul whispers through symbols, through dreams, through subtle shifts we ignore when we live on the surface. But when a woman descends, when she dares to go quiet, the whispers become clear. She sees the dreams that come to her in the night as maps. She feels her emotions not as weaknesses, but as messengers. She begins to speak a new language, one that cannot be taught, only remembered. The language of the sacred feminine, the Anima, the one Jung described not as a role, but as a bridge, the living connection between the ego and the eternal. And now she lives on that bridge. She no longer needs to cross into someone else's world to find meaning. She carries her own. When people ask what changed, she will not have an easy answer. Because transformation is not a headline. It is 1,000 tiny deaths. It is a shedding of skin so slow, so silent, that even she didn't notice it happening. Until one day she woke up and realized she no longer felt like she was waiting for love, for recognition, for arrival. She was already here. Arrival had happened within. And that is the miracle no one can see from the outside. The woman who walks alone, who seems distant, unavailable, even cold, is not disconnected. She is deep in union with herself, with her truth, with the rhythm that doesn't belong to the marketplace of attention, but to the forest of soul. And when love returns, if it does, it will not be the kind that completes her. It will be the kind that bows, that joins, that honors. Because the woman she has become can no longer be consumed. She can only be met. And that meeting must take place not at the surface, but in the depths. Not in rush, but in reverence. Not to heal her wounds, but to celebrate her wholeness. She is no longer the half looking for its other half. She is the whole who chose to return to herself. And that choice is what makes her dangerous, not in violence, but in light. Because a woman who has stopped begging for love is a woman who cannot be bought. She cannot be swayed by pretty words or fleeting passion. She has learned to hear the space between words, to feel the energy behind promises, to sense the fear behind performance. And because she has held herself in the darkest nights, not escaping, not numbing, just being, she knows now what real love is not. Real love is not the ache of absence. It is not the adrenaline of unpredictability. It is not the wound dressed as romance. Real love is peace, a resonance, a quiet recognition that does not demand she shrink silence or suffer. But to arrive at that knowing, she had to lose everything she once called love. She had to let go of the craving, the chase, the confusion. Jung would call this the death of the false self, the persona crafted for validation, and the rebirth of the true self-integrated whole no longer hiding. And that rebirth does not come with applause. It comes with loneliness, with mourning, with long nights where she wonders if she made a mistake, if this silence will ever end, if she will ever feel held again. But she stays. She trusts, because somewhere deep within, there is a flicker that refuses to go out. A knowing that this silence is not death. It is gestation. Something is forming, shaping, emerging. And when it does, she will not return to who she was. She will not shrink to fit. She will not apologize for the fire in her eyes or the storm in her belly. She will carry herself differently, with softness, yes, but also with sovereignty, because she knows now anything that demands she abandon herself is not love. Anything that asks her to perform is not connection. Anything that fears her silence cannot hold her depth. And that knowing is freedom. the kind of freedom that cannot be granted by another, only claimed, the kind of freedom that terrifies those who have not yet met themselves. So they will call her names: too cold, too intense, too much. But Jung would say they are projecting terrified by the mirror she holds up. A mirror that says this is what it looks like when a woman becomes her own source. And when a woman becomes her own source, the world begins to shift around her. Not because she forces it to, but because her very presence now acts as a filter. What is false falls away. What is rooted remains. She no longer negotiates her worth. She no longer explains her boundaries. She no longer seeks to be understood by those still living in the noise. The silence she carries is not absence, it is density, substance, truth. It unnerves those who live on the surface because she demands nothing, and yet everything in them feels exposed in her presence. That is the power of integration. She has walked through the fire of her own contradictions. She has held both her longing and her solitude, her light and her shadow, her ache and her wholeness. She has not escaped her suffering. She has digested it, alchemized it, turned it into gold. Jung believed that the shadow, once integrated, becomes a source of creative energy, of authenticity, of true power. And that is what she now holds, not just survival, but sacred direction. Her life is no longer dictated by who wants her, but by what aligns with her. She doesn't seek love to fill a hole, she seeks it as a mirror, a reflection, a dance. But she knows now how to dance alone. She is not a half waiting for completion. She is a full moon rising, and only those who have eyes to see that light and the strength to stand in it will be able to walk beside her. Her abstinence was never just about sex. It was about energy. It was about sovereignty, about remembering that her body is not a currency. Her presence is not a prize. Her silence is not shame. It is prayer. And now that she has made a home in that silence, nothing less than reverence will do. This is not bitterness. This is clarity. This is the woman who has died 100 quiet deaths in the cocoon of her own undoing and emerged, not needing wings, but choosing them. She doesn't need to be seen to know she exists. She doesn't need to be desired to know she's radiant. And most of all, she doesn't need to be loved to know she's worthy. And now as she walks through the world, unhurried, unbothered, she carries a presence that doesn't ask for attention but commands it. Not through performance, but through embodiment. Because when you faced yourself in silence, there's nothing left to prove. Her voice may be softer now, but it carries thunder. Her gaze may be calm, but it pierces illusion. She doesn't need to chase meaning, she is the meaning. And yet she's not above love. She's not immune to desire. She has simply reclaimed the throne within so that no one else may sit where her soul belongs. Jung would say this is the moment the self manifests fully, when the unconscious and the conscious begin to dance not in conflict, but in union. And that union changes everything. She no longer sees heartbreak as failure, but as initiation. She no longer sees longing as weakness, but as compass. She no longer sees time alone as wasted, but as sacred. Because the woman who has gone silent, not in despair, but in devotion, has become fluent in her own depth. And depth is magnetic. Not everyone can meet her there. Many will turn away. Some will try to shrink her back to size. But a woman who has heard her soul can never unhear it. She can never again trade her truth for comfort. She can never again settle for echoes when she has tasted the source. And this perhaps is why the world often misreads her. They think she's withdrawn, that she's guarded, that she's hardened. But no, she is home. She is lit from within by a fire no lover gave her and no loss can take. And in that fire she becomes something else, not a role, not a label, not an identity, but a force. And forces don't explain themselves. They simply move. So now when her body begins to stir again, when desire returns, not as hunger, but as harmony, she will know the difference. She will know whether it is soul calling or the old wound knocking. And she will choose not from fear, not from loneliness, but from alignment, from depth, from sovereignty. Because she is no longer available for love that asks her to dim her light, to doubt her instincts, to abandon the temple she has built in silence. If love comes, it will be love that honors, love that listens, love that knows how to hold a woman who has already held herself. And until then, she is not waiting. She is living. She is creating. She is becoming. Every day more rooted, more clear, more radiant, because this silence, this sacred stillness, was never about what she lost. It was about what she found, herself. And now that she has found her own voice, her own rhythm, her own truth, there is no turning back. So I'll ask you this. Have you ever mistaken your emptiness for absence when it was actually your soul preparing to speak? If that question stirred something in you, a forgotten ache, a quiet knowing, a breath you didn't know you were holding, then perhaps this silence you're in isn't a void. It's a doorway, a beginning. Leave a comment below and tell us what that doorway looks like for you. What have you discovered in your own quiet? Who are you becoming beneath the noise? And if this journey touched a part of you that's rarely spoken to stay with us, subscribe. Share this message with the women in your life who feel something shifting, even if they can't name it yet. Because this is more than a video. This is a ritual, and you are not alone. You are awakening.